A hero of mine is a nun who was one of the best leaders I ever saw. Her name is Sister Margaret Carney. She's a Franciscan, and for a number of years she was the president of my alma mater, St. Bonaventure, just less than an hour from here. She was always celebrated for being so tireless in her work, but she was also criticized. She was also criticized for being what some people worried was a workaholic. And one day she addressed that, and she said, "Some people accuse me of workaholism, and that's definitely something to watch out for. But you've got to understand that the way I work is an expression of my religious calling." She said, "A lot of religious approach work the same way I do. Personal leisure," she said, "is a value, but it's not my highest priority. I'm here to serve." Two bishops were talking about problems that they had in their different dioceses one time, and the one bishop said, "You know, in our diocese, a lot of priests are suffering from burnout." And the other bishop said, "Yeah, that's not our issue. Our problem isn't burnout, it's ignition. We can't worry about burnout till we've gotten the engine started. So let's go to the gospel. Jesus needed to rest. This wasn't something they wanted to do. They needed to. They were working themselves to the bone, and they needed to rest. They hadn't even eaten. Mark goes out of his way to say they were hangry. They had not even eaten. But those people, they were so lost. They were so lonely. They were hurting so much. If you had been there and you had seen them, you would have done the same thing. Pope Francis was obviously not always the Pope. He had many jobs over his years as a priest. And one of them was in the 70s, he was the vocation director for the Jesuit order for his home country in Argentina. And one of the things he always wanted for the seminarians who were going to be priests was he always wanted them to focus on the poor before they focused on theology. He thought that they wouldn't understand the gospel if they hadn't been with people first. And so sometimes they'd be all, Jesuits are very intelligent and they tend to be very focused on their books. And so they would say, "We have to go study our theology. We have to go read for class tomorrow." And he would say, "That's all well and good, and you can. But first, I want you to go down the road and help Mrs. So-and-so. She's got a problem. First, work with Mrs. So-and-so to solve her problem, and then you can read your books." That's what he always would say to them. He wanted them to know that if you love theology more than anything, then you're always going to be trying to find a moment to grab a cup of coffee and your book and go away. But if you love people even more than theology, then you will be willing to put your book down and go help someone. So we have to take a good look at this question for ourselves. How much do we love people? How willing are we to let the other things in our life take a back seat when someone that God made, someone that Jesus died for, is in need of help? How willing are we to do that? We're living in times that are crazy, and I bet a lot of you have someone in your family or your friend group that you've had a lot of trouble with the past few years because of politics. Everybody's got somebody in their life that there's trouble with right now because we have a lot of stresses in our community. But if we love politics more than people, we don't mind. We'll say, "See you later. You voted that way, forget you." But if we love people even more than our political views, we have to work it out. We can't just focus on ideas more than people. I'm the pastor of two parishes south of Albany on the Hudson River. And there was a woman in one of those parishes that was just beloved. Her name was Mary, and Mary was always doing things for people. One of the stories about her that I loved most was before I became the priest there, a terrible tragedy in town. A 12-year-old was killed while riding his bicycle one day, and his parents were devastated. His mother, everyone in town had heard, had not been out of bed in days. So, one day, there was a knock at the door, and the mother was in bed, and the father came to the door and answered, and there was Mary with a canister vac and a mop and a bucket. And when he answered the door, she said, shh, 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 shh. Don't say a word. I'm just here to clean your house. Just let me in and clean your house, and then I'll go. People were so touched by actions of love like that. I was lucky to be the priest that was there when she was going home to God. Right after I arrived 6 years ago, she was on her deathbed, and I was with her in the hospital, and she said something that I'll never forget. She said, you know, Father, people go out and spend money on face cream. She said, you don't need a pretty face to serve God. You need to buy foot cream. She said, your feet are what you got to take care of. They're how you serve God. Don't worry about your face. So this week, Jesus is asking us to take a look at our own lives. What do we do when we face a situation like he had in the gospel, where we really need to take a rest? We really need to eat. We really need to take care of ourselves. But there is someone who is desperate for help or for someone to listen. What do we do with that great commandment that says the two things that matter are loving God and loving your neighbor? What do we do with that? How do we prioritize our ideas against those people? Or our theology, or our love of studying or reading against those people? Or our need to catch up on that Netflix series or whatever it is that we do in our free time versus those people? Or our politics versus those people? Do we ever put things above people, which of course is not what God asked us to do, but to focus on our neighbor? One friend of mine says whenever he's hangry or whenever he's exhausted and someone comes for one more thing, the thing he says to himself to get himself boosted up is, you know, I may never pass this way again. So any good that I'm going to do, I got to do right here and right now. Now here's where I have to take back all these words for just a second. Because whenever you're dealing with great truth, you have to always pay attention to the opposite. Because the great truth is always so big that the opposite is included in it. What if Sister Margaret, who I talked about in the beginning, what if she is a workaholic? What if you're a workaholic? What if you don't need another homily on how you have to give just a little bit more because you already are a martyr for your family? What if you're the one who's always overdoing it, always over-functioning? What if you need balance? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, that could be. It's a good point. It would be a mistake to not pay attention to that. But let's also admit that we can't worry about burnout until we get to admission.